What's up, Wizards? It's time for Rule Zero, the show that helps you prepare for the best game of Commander. It is our hope that through our decades of experience of playing EDH and cultivating a great playgroup, tons of great decks, and also trying a lot of outside-the-box variants and homebrew rules, that we can pass that golden knowledge on to you. Today, we have a special guest from the playgroup, Jude. How's it going?
Hey, Shawn. Thanks for having me on the show tonight. It's a pleasure to be here.
As is tradition, what's something in the world of Magic that has you excited this week? I will allow Bloomborough.
You made it easy for me. I'll just say I'm excited about that new set with Ral Zarek in it. Apparently he's on some weird plane that turned him into an otter. Magic sure has gotten zany over the past few years, what with Transformers, Lord of the Rings, detectives, cowboys, and now otters. I'm going to a pre-release for it this weekend. It seems neat.
Yeah, I think it's like a Body Snatchers theme set. So
yeah.
He was replaced by an animal.
For sure.
Yeah, it's kind of dark.
It's very dark. I even read the story articles for it. I'm traumatized.
Well, anybody who loves that, listen to last week's episode in which I talk about otter replacement theory. So, the deck we're going to cover today is your tribute to the late, great Sheldon Menery, godfather of EDH, or Commander. You picked up the Secret Lair recently, as did I. Did you ever have any interactions with Sheldon at all?
Unfortunately, I didn't, but I can confidently say that there are few people that I have never met or have never interacted with that have a massive impact on me and my life. Because, you know, as a pioneer and basically the face of the format, he's been instrumental in bringing Commander to all of us. And for me, it's been the only constructed I've played for the last 12 years. Like 12 years ago, a friend came up to me and was just like, hey, you know that standard deck of yours? I've got this other format where, you know, you only need one copy of every card. It's 100 cards, and we can all get together as a group and just have some fun.
Did that really appeal to you, like the singleton nature, pretty much?
It did, because I did not like having to pick up 4 copies of Path to Exile or whatever constructed
at that time, that was pretty expensive, wasn't it? It was. Yeah. It was like a $7 or $8 card at one point, I think.
It most certainly was. So it was just really nice to play a more casual kind of game with my friends that sort of had like this sort of board game feel almost, but it's still Magic. And, you know, Sheldon was integral with that.
Yeah, he was kind of the face of it, wasn't he? He was just like, no matter what the other folks on the RC did, I never really heard from them much. I just heard from Sheldon. I just saw the articles from Sheldon. Like, he was the tip of the spear in a lot of ways, and I think for most people.
He was very active in messaging about the format. He was very active in building decks for the format, too. If you look at his deck list database that you can still find on StarCityGames.com, you can find that he basically made multiple decks for almost every set that came out. Up until his passing, he was still pumping them out.
Yeah, that's true. I remember those set updates sort of that he would release on SCG. It would be like going through almost every color. These are all going into my, 50 decks or whatever it was. Even into the point where he's like in the hospital kind of fighting off cancer. He's still submitting these articles that are just expansive. Yeah, he was a dynamo in that regard.
Yeah, so. It's amazing. And considering the impact he's had on the game as a whole, without it, since I've played Commander almost nonstop for the past 12 years, without it, I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have met OG Rule Zero podcast co-host Taylor, or any of the wonderful folks that we've met at our LGS Gamers Hunt, like Charla, or any of the other great folks that we've played with.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm grateful for that, for sure. I said, I think on the unboxing video, like I met like 90% of my friends through Commander on its own, like not just Magic, but Commander specifically. So rest in peace, sir. And so we're both putting these cards in our decks. I really am excited to talk about old Ruhan here. As far as my own interactions, I hinted at them in the past. The only times I've interacted with Sheldon was twice online, both times, never in person, unfortunately. And to my chagrin, both of them were just me complaining like a typical EDH player. One, I think I was right on, and, If I ever get to spend time honoring old Sheldon at his grave, I will leave a note that says I was right. No, I'm just kidding. One of them was about using square border or sort of gold border collector cards in place of Gaia's Cradle. At that time, Gaia's Cradle was only like $150, only $150.
Of course.
But he was very staunchly against using these alternate versions. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think in reading something later at Reddit, he was very much along the lines of, we need to support our LGSs if we can buy singles, and if we can't afford those singles, we don't necessarily have to play them in our commander decks. And I can't fault that logic. You don't have to play a Gaia's Cradle, but on the off chance that you want to, I wish you could play the cheap gold border version. And so we never saw eye to eye on that. But honestly, that was what I really appreciated about him, was not only was he out in front of the train of Commander, he also never seemed to lose his cool, which is really hard to do in an online world, I think, where there's a lot of me people like yelling at him about stuff. But he was so thank you, Sheldon, for being patient and calm-headed and logical, I think, and being able to just like understand that we all cared about the format. Just sometimes some of us got a little more animated than we needed to be about it. So, speaking of sometimes hitting people randomly when we don't necessarily want to, let's look at Sheldon the Commander. It is Ruhan of the Fomori, and for those of you who don't know, this was from the original set of Commander decks. It was in the Zedru Precon. It is a blue and a red and a white for a 7/7 legendary creature giant warrior. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose an opponent at random. Sheldon, aka Ruhan, attacks that player this combat if able. Philosophy of the deck that Sheldon was most famous for was, you did this to yourself. It's a style that I honestly really enjoy. What do you think about it?
I really like what Sheldon was thinking when he made this deck. It's very unique in how it turns your opponent's power against them. You call this episode Sheldon Aikido. I really like that, because that is what that martial art is about, right? It's about turning your opponent's power against them. And it does it in a very funny and spontaneous way. You know, there are decks out there like Gonti and Turgrid and stuff like that where you're like straight up stealing people's creatures and stuff like that.
Yeah.
This does it in a more, I don't know, in a more flashy kind of way to me. So, for instance, like a 40/40 creature is coming at me. Like, for instance, I had a game recently where a 46/46 Umbris was on the battlefield.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If that comes at me, I can say, all right, no blocks. However, deflecting palm. Sorry, you're dead instead.
It's a great feeling. I think that's why it just brought up all this laughter in me in the moment. I can feel myself viscerally at the table there, and the enjoyment you get from being like, aha, gotcha.
Yeah. Yep.
Never gets old to me. Probably to the players against one of the two of us, but I would love to see what happens if both of our Aikido-style decks are at the table at the same time, and we're just like bouncing combat all over the place. I think it would be great.
It's like a counterspell war, but with damage instead.
Yeah. I deflecting palm, you're deflecting palm. I don't even know if that's possible, but
Judge.
So, as typical with our deck techs, we like to highlight some cards, we highlight play styles, we talk about what kind of doesn't work, and give you an idea at the table. And Jude's been playtesting this a little bit, as much as he could as soon as he got the Secret Lair. We'll share, like, okay, how should you maybe bring this to the table if you're expecting to do well with it? So we're not going to highlight the entire deck. If you want that, it's up. It's on Moxfield. You can see both Jude's original list and also the list that I kind of added some things to, took some things out. So look at the two decks, see what cards you appreciate, which ones you don't. Make your own thing from it. That's what we're trying to do, is leave some space for your own creativity to flourish. So first, we'll talk about kind of what works. Kind of have a little conversation about some of these cards. I saw a card in Jude's list, and I mean, it's like my business card at this point, I think. Windshaper Planetar, 4 and a white for a 4/4 creature angel, flash, flying, When Windshaper Planetar enters the battlefield during the declare attacker step, for each attacking creature, you may reselect which player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. You cannot attack its controller or its controller's planeswalkers. So,
this card is...
have you had a chance to live the dream with it yet, Jude?
I have not, unfortunately. I am very much looking forward to the moment that I can. Your use of this card, Shawn, is inspiring. I had to put it in this deck.
Well, thank you for stroking my ego. I appreciate that greatly. But I do love that you're on the podcast with me here talking about it. And I'll bring it up later, too, I'm sure. But for any listeners who think that I've swallowed the Kool-Aid, Jude can attest to the time when it was, Kyodai that was coming at me for, lethal commander damage. And I didn't stop your Kyodai from doing lethal. I just gently nudged Kyodai towards Carl.
Yes. Yes. It was a wonderful bamboozled moment. And, like you said, you don't nullify the attack. You just sort of aim it somewhere else. So you don't particularly ruin the attacker's day when you play this card. That's kind of what I like about it as well. It's like, it just sort of, it flips the script without shredding it.
I almost feel like you could use this as sort of a political tool. Like, even if you didn't necessarily know that one of your playgroup had it in their hand, you could use it like an alley-oop. Almost like maybe that other player has a ghostly prison style effect, and you're like, I can't pay for all of my creatures to get past that, but what I can do is I could send all my creatures at Shawn, and what Windshaper Planetar is great at doing is avoiding things like ghostly prison tax, because it happens after attacks have already been declared, so you do not have to pay if you send them to that pillow-forted up person. Just saying. Just in case this ever comes up again when we're playing against Carl.
No shade to pillow fort players. None whatsoever.
None at all. Love you all very much. That didn't come across as sincere, I don't think. But anyways, we're going to talk about the number 2 card that I wanted to highlight in this deck, which honestly caught me off guard at first. And then I started thinking about it, and it sent me on another tangent. And we'll talk about a card that had inspired me to bring in. Agar, the Freezing Flame. 1 blue and a red for a 3/3 legendary creature giant wizard. Whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess damage, if a giant wizard or spell you controlled dealt damage to it this turn, draw a card. So tell me how this one works, Jude. What were you thinking when you added this?
Well, I'll put it this way. Ruhan is a giant, and this is a card that cares about giants, and it draws you cards because you have a giant. So I was like, I found it in my collection and said, hey, this could work. Also, since it cares about excess damage, it's not just giants you control, but it's also spells you control. So say I do get to use the Bamboozly Comeuppance, and it reflects damage at a creature they control, this will also trigger Agar. So I'll be able to draw a card off of that kind of effect.
Yeah, so it's like kind of like a little incidental bonus for doing what you're already going to do, which this deck is big on damage. Like, this deck is not the little ping you with 1 every 3 seconds type of deck. This is I hit you for 14 style deck.
Exactly.
Everything Ruhan does, he does big. So it inspired me to go down a little bit of a giant path. So we'll talk about some of those cards here shortly. But Jude, tell me what were some of the cards that you liked or enjoyed in the list.
There is another card that I was interested in from the brand new Assassin's Creed set, the Universes Beyond property that everybody was asking for. lots of fanfare around this one, but it has some cool cards.
It did.
So I picked out Alexios, Deimos of Cosmos. He is a mono red legendary creature, human berserker. For 3 generic and a red, he has trample. Alexios, Deimos of Cosmos, attacks each combat if able, can't be sacrificed, and can't attack its owner. He's also a 4/4, or at least he starts out as a 4/4.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player gains control of Alexios, untaps it, and puts a +1/+1 counter on it. It gains haste until end of turn. Now, I like this card for a very simple reason. Ruhan is chaotic, Sheldon is chaotic, so this guy also adds some more chaos to the
It's
equation.
like a little mini Ruhan. And
yes.
it turns out he doesn't stay mini for long. Those +1/+1 counters get large and in charge. And this thing has trample. It can't be chumped, which is really important, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've seen this thing go off on an MTG Goldfish Commander game, and they all came to the realization very quickly. They're like, this card is bonkers good. It's very hard to get rid of, and it ends games quickly, which I think you enjoy because you also have Descent into Avernus in your list, which I left in just for you.
Sean says Windshaper Planetar is probably his business card. It's getting close to the point where Descent into Avernus is probably mine. It just supercharges the game, makes it a lot quicker. Everybody gets to benefit and be hurt by it. It's symmetrical. It's great. I love Descent into Avernus. Everybody gets treasures. Everybody gets hurt. It's awesome.
Yeah, I kind of love it too. I think it's one of those cards, if we're talking about Rule Zero, you need to really test the waters with to see if your particular play group is as into it as ours is. I think we have a little bit of a masochism streak in ours. It's kind of like, yes, please hit me more. Let's get this over with. And we kind of get thrilled by those games. But I can see a world where other players are like, what do you mean I lose half my life in 2 turns or whatever? I don't need these treasures. So let's talk about a couple of additions. When you sent me the original list, I know that some of the cards you used were just, I got these laying around. And some, you pulled gems out of that. Like Agar the Freezing Flame, I don't know if I would have thought of that, but it certainly sent me down a rabbit hole. One of the cards that I think Sheldon appreciated that I added was Sunforger. For 3, it's a colorless artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +4/+0, which makes Ruhan into an 11/7. For a red and a white, unattached Sunforger, search your library for a red or white instant card with converted mana cost 4 or less, and cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then shuffle your library. Equip is 3. So it costs 6 to put this thing on a creature, and then 2 more to activate it. It sounds expensive, but when you recognize what you can do with this card, it is 100% worth it. What are some of the cards that we can fetch with this, Jude?
Well, we can fetch Comeuppance. We can fetch Deflecting Palm. We can also fetch Boros Charm, Crush Contraband, all kinds of crazy instances.
There's also another fanciful card that was released in the Sheldon Menery collection, Teferi's Protection, which is always nice for a good time. You had Bolt Bend in your list, 4 mana to send a spell elsewhere. Love that kind of Aikido-style effect. You can get it with this. I also put in some extra cards in there to make sure that they had white in them for a counter spell in case you need it. Dovin's Veto you can grab now. In fact, there was another card, and I'll highlight this one real quick because it's the next one on our list, but it also ties in with Sunforger. None other than Paraelectric Feedback. This is a card that I've never heard of that Sheldon had in his actual Ruhan list. For 3 and a red, instant speed. Paraelectric Feedback deals damage to target spell's controller equal to that spell's converted mana cost. Feels niche.
Love this card.
But I love it. Commander is all about those big moments, and I think with decks like this, sometimes you fizzle a little bit or you don't have the targets you need, and this card may sit in a hand. But when it goes off, especially when it goes off against, like, I don't know, a big X spell, like a Torment of Hailfire, that's great. Like, you think you deal a lot of damage to everybody? Just kidding. Before you do that, I deal 25 to you.
The dream scenario for me is casting this in response to someone playing Expropriate. And hopefully them being low enough for that to kill them.
Yeah, that's the dream. Anytime an Expropriate player accidentally falls off a ledge or like their brake lines are cut. No, I'm just kidding. So tell me about a couple of the cards that I kind of added into the list that you weren't necessarily on originally, but which ones kind of struck you as like, oh, these are not bad includes?
Well, you touched upon it a little bit earlier, but it is very true that when I was putting together this deck, I did pick up the main All-Stars, or what I consider to be the main All-Stars, from Sheldon's own You Did This to Yourself list. Mm-hmm. But then I just sort of grabbed cards that I just had lying around in my collection. So I love Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, so I just happen to have a lot of samurais, care about samurais and warriors lying around, so I put some of those. Not all of them are the best, but I threw some of those cards into the deck.
I left 2 in, so let's talk about the ones I did leave in real quick. We've got Selfless Samurai, 2-mana 2/2, Fox Samurai. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, it gains lifelink until end of turn, and then you can sacrifice it. Another target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. Tell me about this one, because I think this one could be really solid in this deck.
This one did work for me in one of my games because he just makes it so Sheldon hits for 7 and gains you 7 life. That's a 14-point life swing. Really good, really good. And just, I can sack it to protect him in a pinch. I never really had to do that, but it was really nice to just have that massive amount of life gain, especially if I did have Descent into Avernus out. It would keep me a little bit above parity with everyone else, or if I'm playing against someone who's playing, I don't know, maybe a Perforos deck or something that deals a lot of damage to their opponents.
I don't know anybody like that.
Not
Just
at all.
kidding. Listeners, we've been playing against Perforos, God of the Forge, for approximately 10 years or more.
Yep.
If you wonder why we're so mentally deranged sometimes on this show and we have such strong opinions, it's because we have been living in trauma. Our friend Mike has a merciless Perforos deck, although he himself is fairly merciful. Like, there's a lot of times where he'll be like, I'll kill you on turn 5 instead of turn 4. You're welcome.
Yes. We love you, Mike.
Yeah, we do. We do. So, I love that one, and I also love this other one, Ryu Storm's Edge, for 2, a red, and a white. First strike, 3/3, human samurai. Whenever a samurai or a warrior you control attacks alone, untap it. If it's the first combat phase of the turn, there is an additional combat phase after this phase. Get to play this one at all?
I've not been able to play this one just yet. I've not played enough games with this, but it's incredibly impactful just simply because that's another attack with Sheldon, especially if he's equipped with something or has 11 power. There's a small possibility you could just kill someone with Ryu out giving you an extra combat phase, especially if you give Ruhan/Sheldon double strike as well.
For sure. And one of the things we added was to do that was added an MDFC from the newest set, Modern Horizons 3, Legion Leadership. It is a red or white land on one side that comes into play tapped, but on its face side, you can pay 1 a red-white hybrid, instant speed until end of turn, double target creature's power, and it gains first strike. That seems good.
Yes.
Surprise.
Really good. Excellent. And it's a land. They just, yes.
Yeah,
they just made awesome spells that are also lands.
Yeah, sure, because we need more value. What I like about it, honestly, is that you can play cards that are not necessarily seen as competitive, like a Sheldon, and still get away with it these days because there are enough cards like this that are just innocuous but like extremely powerful. So even on a budget, this would be a great card for anybody who is trying to build some kind of aggressive Voltron strategy. In red-white, the land of equipment, you're going to be able to take someone out quick with this little gem. So let's look at, I think we've got one more on the list that I want to hit. Oh, this should be fun because I remember playing this in Arena. Cyclone Summoner, 5 and 2 blue, a creature giant wizard, 7/7. When Cyclone Summoner enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, return all permanents to their owner's hands except for giants, wizards, lands. How you feel about this one?
This is an awesome card. Splashy, powerful, synergistic with Sheldon, just really cool. I just love that it's kind of like a Cyclonic Rift in some ways, in that you just get to keep your stuff and everybody else's goes kaput. That leaves an open field for Sheldon to just run around and have fun.
Absolutely, which I think is leading me to this next section, which I want to talk about, is now that you've had a chance to experience it, and I've played Ruhan in the past, what is a trap that you can fall into, you think, as a Ruhan player, and something that we talked about earlier?
So one thing that I did try doing when I came out with this deck after I built it was play Ruhan as quickly as possible. And as mana cost sort of lends you to do that because it costs 4 mana, often comes out on turn 3. So you've got a turn 3 7/7 who comes out swinging on turn 4, and it can be a problem for your opponents very quickly. They now have massive red flags on your deck because there's a 7/7 that might come for you. You actually don't know if it is or not. But even just there's no political way to really allay the Ruhan player from attacking you. It's just, well, The dice says what the dice says. There's nothing I can do about it. So it might even actually create a situation where they're even more implored to use removal on it just because there's no way to say, hey, could you just send this to someone else? I'm running behind on lands. You know, that kind of thing.
If those players were playing Windshaper Planetar, they would be able to send it somewhere else on their own. So let's victim blame a little. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, this is the gaslighting deck. You did it to yourself.
It is kind of that way, isn't it? Oh, for being such a nice guy, Sheldon had this little streak in him. I can tell that was. This is how he worked out all his frustration with the commenters. What I like about going over this for listeners in particular is that you may think in playing a deck like this, you can just get away with saying, oh, the dice told me to hit you. I have not found that to be the experience of playing a deck like this. Or even if you don't know who to hit with the big splashy spell, and everyone's done this, I'll admit to it, you try to roll a dice to see how do I make my decision. That does not make it easier for the person who gets picked. They're still going to be frustrated, I think. Sometimes it's even more frustrating when the dice pick you 2 or 3 times in a row, because then they're kind of like, come on, just like, please send it somewhere else if you can. But with Ruhan, you can't.
Yes, exactly. And no matter what, you're still getting hit for 7. It doesn't matter if it was random. It doesn't matter. The person piloting it had no choice in the matter. It still is a bummer. I want that creature gone, so I don't get hit for 7 again. So when I think of that, it's probably important, especially considering that this is an Aikido-style deck that's reflecting damage or sending people's power back at them. It might be better just to wait a few turns more than turn 3 or turn 4, whenever you want to play Ruhan, just to let other people build up their own board states a bit, and then send them out swinging, just so they have more things they can use to sort of deal with it.
Yeah.
While you also have more resources that you can use to cast Windshaper Planetar, or like Deflecting Palm or Narset's Reversal, or any of those kinds of spells.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're totally okay to sit back with this deck at a casual to high power, casual level pod, and just play defense, go under the radar, present Sheldon, look, it's my tribute deck to a great man. Mm-hmm. And then don't do anything for a little while, but get that Lightning Greaves out. Get maybe that land Slayer Stronghold that kind of gives it +2/+0 in haste. And then hit somebody hard, hit them fast. And before they know it, they're kind of out of the game and they're like, what happened?
Well, you did it to yourself.
And this way, honestly, if you play him a little later, you get a little more protection for Sheldon in the first place, right? So you can Boros Charm and give him indestructible, Dovin's Veto somebody, any of these little tricks that we have in the deck. I even added like a 1-mana spell. I added a Lauren's Escape, which is a new instant for 1, and a 1-white. Target artifact or creature gains hexproof and indestructible into turn. Scry 1, just because they needed to add some more words on the card. It's already good. So I think the later you play the card, pick your shots a little bit with it, I think the better time you'll have. Because honestly, part of the joy of the deck is not necessarily hitting people in the face with Ruhan. Part of the joy is casting that comeuppance, because they see that your board is clear of threats. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I will just go after you, because let's face it, Commander players, I think, are lazy. And I'm just making a judgment here, I apologize. But it's like, if they saw a wall that they had to climb over, even if that wall was like 2 feet, they'd be like, nah. I'm just gonna walk straight through this person's yard who has like no obstructions.
Of course.
Like, that's why rattlesnake cards work so well. 1 Baleful Strix on the table, and everyone will ignore that player. So you present a clear space. It's like you've built a Ponzi pit into your yard, and you're like, look how nice this is. Come, attack me.
Nothing bad will happen
at all.
Nothing bad will happen, and if it does, it's your fault anyway. So
one thing that's interesting about these in a continuing play group, I think there's a cumulative effect of players, like with Windshaper Planetar for me. I think if I have 5 white mana open, and you can tell me if this is correct or not, isn't there a suspicion that I have a Windshaper Planetar?
There's a good chance, yeah. Oftentimes I'll probably just think, well, you got mana open, you probably got something, because that's just how my monkey brain learns magic, to think like, well, the blue player has mana open, they probably have something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what this
Yeah.
deck does. Like, if you see this deck at the table and they have any mana open, there are so many ways that you can have things go wrong by attacking that player.
Yes.
So I think you get this kind of added cumulative benefit of playing this deck over and over again by doing that more slow defensive style. And it will give you an opportunity to win some games by pretending to be low-key and relaxed for a while, instead of just coming out of the gate really hard. So,
yeah, definitely.
Final thoughts on the Sheldon Aikido deck as you have it now. I don't know. What are you looking forward to adding, changing, playing with it? Cards you haven't gotten to play yet?
I really like the tinkering you've done with the deck for the show, Shawn, especially cards like the Cyclone Summoner and, of course, the Sunforger. I'm kind of ruining myself for not putting that in my starting build, but those cards will be very helpful in causing a lot more fun when I play this deck in the future.
Well, I'm so glad that I could assist, even though some of this may come at me. I may not be glad later.
That is true. That is true.
There's so many
I'll just say
tricks in
thank
this
you,
deck.
Shawn.
Yeah, you're welcome for now. Take that. But yeah, Sunforger, I do honestly wish that you have joy in playing it. It is a card that is so powerful, and as a newer player to EDH, you may look at this old equipment from Ravnica block and think to yourself, that's not good. There's no way that can be good. It costs so much mana. You're going to be surprised because it is incredibly powerful, and it seems like at instant speed, they always have the answer, and that's because they do. In their deck, I think in this deck, we've built in maybe like 15, 16 different instant speed answers that you can pull out for any situation.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, next up on Rule Zero, we're going to have a special sort of more video essay form in which I tackle a topic that is, who knows if it's too niche or not, but I've noticed the trend in Magic design where instead of doubling things, let's just triple things. So it reminded me of a razor commercial from the early 2000s in which Gillette tried to move from 4 blades to 5 blades on their razor and just did this hilarious ad campaign. So I'm going to compare Gillette's Limp Bizkit infused razor commercials in which they try to make shaving look like the edgiest thing that's ever happened to Wizards' new design philosophy of why not do 3 things instead of 2. So hope you look forward to that. Jude, any final thoughts or anything before we wrap this show up?
Just once again, I appreciate your help with the deck. I'm just really glad I could pay my respect to Sheldon in some way, just because, like I said before, he has indirectly had quite an influence on my life, on your life, on our playgroups' lives. We've forged some lasting relationships thanks to the efforts of this man.
Yeah, the truth of the matter is we built these decks. We really look forward to getting these Sheldon tribute cards because of how important the man was. And, you know, any EDH game you play is almost like its own little tribute to this guy. Because I don't know if it gets out of the judges' circle without his strong push and guidance over all the years. It could be a thing that fizzles out without him. I think we all owe him just a pause, a moment, and, think about him the next time you get Aikido'd by Windshaper Planetar. So, as we wrap up and close this episode of Rule Zero, know that you can follow us on Twitter at Rule Zero Podcast or email us at rulezeropodcast@gmail.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, like, subscribe, let us know in the comments. If you would like us to highlight one of your decks, I would love to. So just reach out to us, and remember,
in Magic, there's no problem that a Rule Zero conversation cannot solve.